Start recording. Okay. Oh,
Starting.
yeah, I think we are officially recording, and here we go. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the the Sylvester Stallone Fan Podcast Network. I gotta be clear. This is not Frank Stallone's.
His fan podcast network.
Yeah, I wonder how Frank Stallone's podcast is doing out there. His network fans and what have you. So shout out to Frank.
Thousands of fans that he has, right, across the world.
I don't know if you heard.
I think this episode that's coming up, they're going to be highlighting his cameo in Rocky 2.
Oh,
they're going to be devoting a whole 3-hour episode to his cameo in Rocky 2.
It's Brian, Greg, and Rug.
All right. Well, I'm really excited today. Well, first I'll introduce myself for anyone that's a first-time listener because they came onto this episode for the first time because they saw that we're doing the Expendables. I am Ryan. I host the podcast called Going the Distance, the Rocky series and Creed podcast. That is found on this same feed. So go look at the library. You'll see it. I've covered Rockies 1 through 6 and Creed are all done. Our next season, season 8, will be Creed Part 2. Doug?
Part of the Rocky Minute podcast, where we go through the Rocky movies 1 minute at a time. We have completed seasons 1 and 2 and are grinding our way through season 3. But you can catch all of season 1, and at this point, I think we've released half of season 2 on our new home at the Sylvester Stallone Fan Podcast Network.
Yeah, right on.
Craig.
Yeah, I'm Craig. I'm with the Slycast, which unfortunately we don't put out as much content as Ryan and Doug do. We have a lot of moving parts on our show, a lot of people involved, and a lot of busy people, including Mike Kunda, who just started his excellent show from Contender to Pretender. So if you're missing Mike on a podcast, check that out. But I'm keeping busy myself. I'm doing music, and I'm also doing a monthly podcast called Conversations at Jack Rabbit Slims, which you three bozos are all going to be on eventually at different points.
Well, I'm recording with you as of this recording tomorrow. I'm excited for that. I'm excited to guest on that podcast and talk Pulp Fiction and Quentin. And yeah, I'm actually geeking out a little bit about that. I can't wait.
It's going to be awesome.
And lastly, but not best for last, quite frankly, we had this individual guest voice cameo recording on our Expendables 3 coverage because he was unable to make that actual live recording. And we were very sincere when we said that Sean Malloy's recording was more succinct and well put together than our hour and a half of rambling of nothingness. And he's guessing with us live. So we expect that same kind of caliber. Sean, why don't you introduce yourself, the podcast that you host on your own, and say hi.
Yeah, hey, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. I feel kind of like the outsider jumping in on the boys' club here. So
You're one of the boys. Don't you worry about it.
My name is Sean. I host I Must Break This podcast, which is the podcast that looks at the filmography of Gunnar Jensen himself. Dolph Lundgren, and Doug has been on a couple episodes. Craig has been on a couple episodes. Ryan, you and I spoke. I got you penciled in. You're going to be coming on, and I'm really excited to be joining you guys for this one because this one was, not only was this film a love letter to the action genre, but this was Dolph Lundgren's return to the big screen, and he had pretty much been in direct-to-video purgatory from about 1993 up until this point. And guys, let me tell you, I have watched a lot of garbage leading up to this moment here. And so not in 2010, when this came out, I don't think there's been a movie that I've been more excited for. Not just the fact that it was all these guys together, but the fact that it was Dolph Lundgren's return to the big screen. And so as a result, I've really been looking forward to joining you guys for this one. It's funny because I feel like this episode, in a sense, if we're going to review the Expendables, it only makes sense that we do kind of like our own version of the Expendables, you know what I mean? Where we all come together, and I got dibs on it now. I get to be Dolph Lundgren. I get to be Gunnar Jensen. I'll let you guys duke it out on which one of you gets to be Sylvester Stallone, okay?
Barney.
But yeah.
Barney
Whoever wants to be Barney.
Barney, if that's his real name, which I caught on this this go around watching when Church says to Barney, "If that's your real name," and yeah.
Yeah, I just want to, before we get deep into the movie, I got to say I'm kind of glad that we watched these movies in almost reverse order, because it really showcases how effing good this movie is compared to the other two. I mean, this is a legitimate good movie, and if I'm putting together a Stallone top 10 like today, I'm pretty sure that The Expendables makes that list.
That's fair. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
Does Eric Roberts belong in the Hall of Fame of bad guys?
He's great.
Or what? He is a fantastic bad guy.
He's a great actor.
I've read that Eric Roberts, he'll show up for anything. I mean, if the check clears, he will show up and he will do any role that is offered to him. And I've actually heard that he's actually a really good dude. I mean, I actually mailed my DVD cover of Best to the Best to him, and he graciously signed it. Nice. And mailed it back to me. So he's a good dude. But yeah, I think as long as, kind of like Danny Trejo, as long as the check clears, you're going to get Eric Roberts for 2 days.
You know what? No shame in that.
I would think that you'd have to have a sense of humor when you kind of grow up in the shadow of a more famous other sibling. Like him, Julia Roberts is his sister. So,
but he was actually a thing before Julia Roberts was. So imagine like if Sly was Sly, but then Frank came in and his music career blew up, and then all of a sudden, like, nobody gave a shit about Sly anymore. That's what happened with Eric Roberts.
Yeah. Yeah, but he didn't stand a chance when she came on the scene. But you kind of have to, like, Frank Stallone may have gone in the other direction and kind of, had sour grapes about it. But Eric Roberts, like, if he's as down to earth and friendly as Sean says, then, more power to him. God bless him.
Yeah, I don't think he's got the Frank Stallone bitterness towards his sibling, and you also don't see Eric, riding the tailcoat of all of Julia's tweets or Instagram videos or whatever. It's like, hey, look at me, I'm this. Look, I got my issues with Frank. I'm just gonna say it. I don't care. Now the things are up in the clear, but we'll leave it at that. I'll tell you guys offline.
He's on his way, man. You better lock your doors.
I don't care.
Wouldn't that be something though? If like when sleeping with the Enemy or Pretty Woman or any of those movies that came out in the 90s, we found out that Eric Roberts was contributing music to the soundtracks of those films.
That'd be awesome.
I think we're missing Eric Roberts' best performance ever, which was the Cable Guy.
That's right. He played the Menendez brother or something like that.
That's right.
So not only does he play a great villain, he's also got great comedic chops.
He was in that with Ben Stiller. Was he? Because Ben Stiller was one of the brothers, wasn't he?
Well, no.
Ben Stiller played the brother, and then Eric Roberts played the dramatization.
Oh, yeah, there was it was like the TV movie version that Eric Roberts played.
Well, welcome to the Cable Guy podcast. We. Well, I'm really excited to have Sean here. And Sean, right on air, I'll just ask for you to come on and guest host on one of the Creed 2 episodes with my other co-host, because as you very well know and our listeners know, that Dolph has a huge role in Creed Part 2, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on his performance. Not now, we'll save it for the Going the Distance podcast, but I want to hear your thoughts on Dolph's performance in Creed 2. When we get to that, and I think you would you'd be a great addition to hear your voice on some key scenes there. So yeah, Craig, you brought up an excellent point. I thought the exact same thing. For whatever reason, we did the order that we did, just because when we did the poll voting for these films, I think we threw in Expendables 2 versus other films that maybe were part 2s in a series. I can't quite remember, but definitely part 3 was done that way. We put Expendables 3 against Spy Kids 3 and Escape Plan 3, I think. Did we do Escape Plan 3 yet? No, we haven't. Oh,
no. No.
Anyways, so that's right. We thought Escape Plan 3 was going to win just because people love it when we cover dumpster fires. So this Expendables 1 coverage, it was not put up for a poll because we were just wanted Sean on. Sean's like, man, I really wish I could be there. So we're like, let's just do it. It's our show. We're just going to do Expendables Part 1 and get it done. And I think we were all in the mood to kind of watch something that was well done. And Craig, again, you hit the nail on the head that watching this, I just watched it yesterday, preparing again for this episode. Yeah, it's such a fun, fantastic, legitimate, good action movie. And let's just credit right away Sly's directing.
Yep, I was going to say that we have to lead with that, and it's something that was sorely missed from the sequels. And I think once the Expendables, the first one, did the level of business that it did, I think Sly said, "Okay, I can sit back now and sort of rest on my laurels and let other people do the heavy lifting." But I think his direction adds such a great touch to this movie. And the other thing about this movie, and I mentioned it in the part 3 coverage, is you get to see the other members of this team, especially Jason Statham's character. He gets his own little arc. You almost think that they're like setting this up to like have Jason Statham carry it after Stallone rides into the sunset. But then you also, and I don't want to jump around in the movie here, which I'm great at doing, you also get that great little moment where Sly and Jet Li break off and they have their little action sequence. It's just, I think it's a really good showcase for all the actors involved. And I think it really showcases how teams work as well. And I think that's something that was missing in part 2 and clearly was missing in part 3.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Craig. I mean, I think, as I looked back upon it when I watched it again, I will say, I guess I'm going to slightly differ from you in a sense in that, the whole little subplot or story arc with Jason Statham's character, I think it would work if this film was a TV series, or if it was at the very least a mini series, because I feel like, okay, yeah, it's cool that they're doing it, but on the other hand, it's an hour and 40 minutes or whatever, and they're giving this little subplot to Statham's character, but then they give nothing to Jet Li's character. They really don't give anything to Randy Couture's character. Jet Li's character gets a little throwaway line about how he has a family, but then all the guys kind of joke about that, like, what are you talking about, a family? And then that gets thrown away. And so I actually have a buddy, he did his own cut of this movie, and he actually lifted out everything with Charisma Carpenter, the girlfriend of Jason Statham, because he was like, look, this really adds nothing to the movie, and so he took it out.
Visually,
I can go on both sides.
You get that great basketball court.
That is a great
fight scene.
No, that's a great and that's actually something you are sacrificing. Interesting that maybe your buddy there saw the Charisma Carpenter. And look, she's easy to look at, so I had no problem. The Charisma Carpenter scenes, they were a little bit weird because I was actually kind of confused about the relationship in that he comes to the house with a ring, which, he was gone for a month doing his mission. She doesn't really know what he does for work. Like, he didn't even have enough decent courtesy to lie about what he did. He just says, I'm not going to tell you what I do, which is odd, like, because she goes, I don't even know what you do. We've been together for a year and a half. I don't even know what you do for work. And I would be concerned too if I was a father to the daughter. Like, you don't know what your boyfriend does. It's kind of weird. And he seems to have a motorcycle and all these toys. But that all that being said, so it was kind of poor. It was the most weakest part of the film was their dialogue and their relationship. ... That basketball court scene, I guess you could have done it some other way. Like when he beats up the jerk who hit the girl, that's always fun to watch. And what a great fight sequence. Jason Statham, incredible physical actor. And when when the guy's in the air and he hits him down on the ground again, I remember seeing that in the theaters, the roll, like, whoa.
Yeah, that's one scene. That's one hit that you're like, how did they fake that? Because it might be the way the camera angle was, the sound design. I mean, everything. But I do get that point, Sean, and the movie would probably be stronger without that unnecessary thread. But I also think that that's something that sets this movie apart from the other ones. If you look at the Jason Statham scenes in this movie, you care about that character, whereas in part 3, you don't care about Ronda Rousey. I mean, just there's no other way to put it.
Or Glenn Powell. Or
it's really
wow.
the whole new breed that you don't care about. And also, we came right off of that PG-13 rating in Expendables 3. Now we're back to the original, the hard R, the exploding bodies.
I saw I had no choice. I have both Blu-rays. I have the theatrical cut, and I also bought the director's cut, which I highly, highly, highly recommend the director's cut. It's a better film. And I just moved. I've still got a couple of moving boxes behind me, and I couldn't find the Blu-rays in time to watch, so I watched it through a streaming service yesterday, which happened to be a the director's cut. So it's an hour and 53 minutes long. The theatrical cut is an hour and 43. So there's quite a bit more footage. So I don't think any of my comments are going to be that different than what if you saw the theatrical versus the director's. But I will just say the director's cut is an amazing cut. Different stuff is the stuff that I remember that's different is right at the beginning you have a bit of a monologue by Sly, which I don't think is in the theatrical cut, where he talks about they live in the shadows or something like that. And then the airplane scene at the beginning after their first mission is a little bit different. It's a little bit more montage, drawn out, kind of like a bluesy, slow music. And then the final battle at the end, that big battle at the end, they had this like new age metal song playing or whatever. I don't know how to describe
Diamond
it.
Eyes.
Oh, is that
Diamond Eyes by
okay.
Shinedown. Yeah, that was the song that was actually in the trailer.
Okay. I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to lie, it was kind of fun. It was kind of fun to hear that song being played while they're and then it morphed into the soundtrack of the film. But it was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this. It was actually kind of a fun little sequence of them just like explosions, bolts, and what have you. But let's go back.
Well, actually, since we're there, I do want to say that there were moments. Brian Tyler did the music for this, right? Like he's been Sly's guy for. I did notice during that last sort of siege on the island that I heard hints of the stuff that he did for the 2 Rambo films.
Interesting.
And I wonder if that was he didn't think that he was going to really be scoring that sequence. And then Sly was like, yeah, they're not going to use the Shinedown song, so you got to come up with something.
Oh, maybe.
I mean, I'll admit, though, I feel like for a concept like this film that it is, okay, all these action stars together in one movie, I feel like a concept like that alone needs a score, needs a signature score that you can hum in your head or whatever. And I mean, look, I remember the score. I mean, that dun 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 dun. I mean, I remember that, and it's a pretty I wouldn't say it's as iconic as Rambo for that matter, or Rocky, or even, but it works, and it really brings it for those scenes.
No, I mean, I'm not going to say that I have my finger on the pulse of what's going on in Hollywood, because I don't, but he's one of the more memorable score guys when I see his name, because it seems like he's more of a throwback to sort of what Jerry Goldsmith did. He'll get really orchestral, but he'll also get really percussive and into that area of things. So anytime I see his name, I get interested in seeing what he's going to do.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Jerry Goldsmith, Craig, because I had the same kind of feeling that it's, harking back to the old 80s action films that are like surrounded in a military kind of setting. They have that march type of music, and yeah, it definitely brought me back to that kind of era.
It's actually not a very not a very bad. It's a very good soundtrack. It's got that very heavy oomph in its orchestra. It's a great action soundtrack. It's a well done movie, guys. At the end of the day, this is not a dumpster fire. This is a barn burner. This is a great fun action film, and we loved Expendables 2. I think the weakest one we talked about, of course, is Expendables 3, and what was missing from 3 had nothing to do with the direction. I think the direction style was good. I think Patrick Hughes did a good job with the direction. I think he did a good job wrangling the actors. We said it before 100 times. It was the new crew, kind of taken away from the old crew, and part 2, of course, I just tip my hat to Jean-Claude for being the greatest villain of the trilogy. However, part 1 is a real showcase of the original kind of Expendables crew, and yeah, the Statham-Stallone relationship was fun to watch when they're kind of, talking about relationship talk with each other. And so it'd be interesting, Sean, to see what your friend cut out there, because there was a lot of talk that Statham had, at least in the director's cut, where he's talking about his relationship with his girl, and that's kind of an ongoing gag throughout the film. So it'd be interesting to see what.
Well, and I think half the reason, I mean, as I've seen this multiple times, but in watching it again, I think the big reason why they gave Statham's character so much to do is because, I mean, if you look at the year this was, not so much the year it came out, but the year that it was made, Statham was like the leading action guy in the genre. I mean, Stallone was basically kind of slowly on a comeback. Lundgren, he was in the direct-to-video era, if you will. But all those other guys really weren't. I mean, Terry Crews, Randy Couture, they were still trying to kind of prove something. And so it makes sense from a marketing standpoint for Statham's character to really be the one who, maybe he's not the one running the show and leading the show, but he's the one who arguably I think gets the most to do in this film. What's interesting is how they basically sideline him for a good 30 minutes or so in part 2. If you remember, in part 2 when they go to Bulgaria,
I think it was filming obligations, if I remember correctly. So they made the storyline seem like you're putting me in this crappy side mission. I think that was an inside joke, but also written for the movie because I think he had obligations where he couldn't be on set as much as he due to conflicts because it's so hard to correlate all these guys' careers. That's my understanding.
Yeah, but to your point, though, I mean, it makes sense, though. I mean, if you think about it, considering in the first Expendables movie, for the entire second act of the movie or so, it's pretty much the Stallone and Statham show. And then in the second one, it's Statham who gets sidelined, and suddenly Dolph is given much more to do in that second act of Expendables 2. So is Terry Crews. So is Randy Couture. I have a few feelings about him. I don't even think he should be in this movie. But
just say no. Just say no. What's your? There's no sequence of events. Just talk about why.
Well, okay, I don't want to mitigate his talents in the MMA field or in the octagon because he could mangle me with one.
He would destroy all of us on his knees with both hands behind his back.
But he's not an action star. And I remember when this movie was shopped and when it was being marketed and promoted and everything. I mean, I was stoked. I don't think I've been more excited for a movie.
Oh yeah.
And this comes from someone who grew up with comic books in the 90s. So I was more stoked for this than I was the Avengers or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so when it was announced, it was like, okay, Stallone, awesome. Statham, he's a guy, he's an action dude, great. Jet Li, that works. And then if you remember, the fourth one that was announced was Dolph Lundgren. And so that one for me put this on a whole other level because it was like, okay, that's great. And then suddenly they started adding more cast members. And then they announced Randy Couture. And I remember thinking like, well, okay, he's a tough guy, but he's not an action star. Like, come on. And I could tell Craig, you agree with me on this one. So.
Oh yeah, no, obviously, yeah. And I think this goes back to what we saw in part 3 that Sly, I think he was really ready to put all of his eggs in the MMA basket. I think he probably saw MMA as like the new boxing. Sure. And I think that was sort of Sly's maybe idea of how to get different eyes on his projects.
Because he even had an MMA fighter in Grudge Match, so that was around the same time. So he's definitely, I think he generally probably enjoys the sport. And look, Ronda Rousey for part 3, so he's definitely enjoyed having MMA.
David Bautista have a background in fighting too?
Just I think wrestler. He had more of a. Well, no, I think he also had more traditional. What is that? What's the martial arts competitions?
Krav Maga, rather?
Yeah, maybe Krav Maga.
I don't know how to say. I don't know. Taekwondo, Doug? Is it Taekwondo?
I think he did. I think he did leave the WWE. Don't quote me on this, but I think he did leave the WWE and he did try MMA for a brief period. But
to stay on the MMA side of things, you see that in the fighting style towards the end of the movie. Sly's doing MMA moves, and then you have that great fight, which is the only reason Randy Couture's in the movie, is you get 2 Stone Cold Steve Austin fights, which is awesome. And the one with Randy and Stone Cold is a real good showcase for both of their abilities.
Right, and I think that was put in there to be like, we have 2 wrestling guys going at it for this part.
Well, but I also think it gives Stone Cold a great character arc too, because he fights Sly, pretty much beats him, and then he goes to the final boss, which is Randy Couture, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, they play to what I like about the Expendables is they kind of play to the real world with the art world, and in that, yes, we know that Steve Austin is a sports entertainer. He's a wrestler, but to be that, you have to be physical. You have to be coordinated. You just can't be. I hate it when they say that wrestling is fake. It's not fake. It's scripted, but the entertainment is real, and the jumps and the bumps and the things these guys go through, especially of course during the Mick Foley days and what have you. These guys,
the physicality of it,
it's incredible what they do. And so, if you think about it, if you're an action film director and you've got to get some physical fights done for your film, would you hire me? Just because I got a pretty face? Or would you hire, like, maybe Couture, who can, I can take the bumps, I can take the hits, I got the grappling moves. It's a matter of just, the training to get them to do the fighting Well, it's just like the Rocky films. You get a boxer or do you get an actor? Sometimes you can get a bit of both, but with these action sequences at the end of the day, Couture was hired to do that fight with Austin. And it was a great, let's just talk about that fight there with the fire and the bumps and the slams and stuff. It's a hell of a fight. And full credit to Steve Austin. He's really got a lot of, well, that's why he was so popular. He's got a lot of charisma on screen. He carries it even in the film.
Well, it's funny. Me and Sean have had an offline conversation about Stone Cold probably earlier this month. The latest episode of Conversations at Jackrabbit Slim's, I sat down with a screenwriter named John Sullivan, who wrote a really, really good Stone Cold movie called
Great interview,
Recoil.
by the way. Great. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, great.
And he also wrote a movie for Antonio Banderas, so there's a huge Expendables connection there.
Yeah.
But after Sean listened to that episode, we were sort of texting back and forth about, Stone Cold's movie career and stuff like that. And
way too short-lived.
Yeah. And it's a shame because if you watch him in the Expendables, he's got the charisma. I mean, he was one of the biggest wrestling stars. I mean, it's probably like if you look at popularity, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin. In terms of asses and seats and merchandise, I mean, how many of those skull shirts did you see?
Or 316 or whatever.
But yeah, I mean, he holds his own with everybody on screen here. And who knows? Maybe you credit some of that to Sly's directing again. Sly knows how to work with actors.
Mm-hmm. Just for the record, David Bautista did embark on an MMA stretch lasting one fight.
Oh,
that he won.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah, but
he went on top.
Yeah, he did. He did. It says, he became a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under tutelage of Cesar Gracie, one of the famed Gracie family members.
Yeah, going to be no rematch.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to mess with him. So the question, we actually have one person in our YouTube chat, like I was saying before. I put this on YouTube just so I have a backup recording. We are being joined by a fellow named Drew. He's actually chiming in quite a bit here, so hi to Drew. He has a question that I think we'll leave to Sean to answer. Sean, did you feel that the Lundgren Lee fight lived up to the hype? Or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I love the Lundgren Lee fight. I will say it was interesting because that was one of the things that Stallone and Dolph Lundgren actually they kind of spoiled early on when the film was being shopped and when it was being filmed and everything. That was one of the things that they kind of were like, oh yeah, Lundgren and Lee don't like each other. They get into it and everything. And that was one of the things that I think maybe should have been left as a surprise to audiences. But yeah, I think it's a great fight. I think if there's one thing about it that I don't like, there's way too much close-up shots, and so you don't really get to see Lundgren's style versus Jet Li's fighting style. And so that was one of the slight disappointments. I will see, if you want to see what I think this fight should have been and sadly wasn't, Dolph did a movie back in 2015 called Skin Trade, where he and Tony Jaa, I don't know if you guys know who Tony Jaa is, but Tony Jaa,
the Protector, yeah.
Yeah, he and Tony Jaa go at it, and the way that fight scene is filmed is what I feel like the fight scene here in Expendables should have been, because there's lots of wide shots, and so you get to see the scope of that fight. And again, a lot of the the fight in Expendables 1 is because they're in such close quarters, you know what I mean? But in any case, I would say check out the fight scene in Skin Trade. It's pretty dope.
I will say and everything you said is completely on point there, Sean. But one of the cool things about this is seeing how Jet Li's character even the playing field by drawing Gunner into spaces that he knew that like there were going to be low hanging bars and stuff where his height would work against him. So I thought that was a real cool character trait and sort of showed how his character approaches, evening the playing field when he needs to.
Sean, you brought up the quick cuts and everything in the fight scene, and that was one I think we talked about it it might have been our Expendables 3 episode, but this is one of those more recent action movies that have like really wild camera moves during the fight sequences, quick cuts, shaky camera, so you can't really see the beginning to the end of the fight. There's very little choreography going on there, except within those little frames. And fighting like that drives me nuts. I want to see a nice choreographed fight. And that's what if I have a criticism of this movie, it's that.
I'm in the middle. I see both points. I think it was just enough where it was entertaining just to see Lundgren versus Lee. I mean, if you're to tell me 20 years ago, can you imagine, or 20, or like 1990, let's say it was 1993, and you're like to say, hey, well, I guess it would have to be 94 when Lethal Weapon 4 came out. You say, hey, see that Jet Li guy that you just saw for the first time on screen? Well, he's going to fight Dolph Lundgren in the film. Like, what? Like, the fact that we're even seeing these combinations, Austin versus Couture, Austin versus Sly, and then Lee versus Lundgren. And I was just going to say, I think that what it reminded me of a little bit was having the Lee versus Lundgren within the Expendables infighting was a little bit of like Avengers. Speaking of Avengers, like Avengers Civil War. We know they're on the same team a little bit, but they're just kind of pissed off at each other. They have different ideals, and we get to see the superpowers used against each other instead of just against the common villains, so to speak. So it was cool to see these two trained fighters in their own right kind of choreographer this or have this fight on screen. But it could have been more. I agree, a little bit more lighting, a little bit more. I don't know why Sly did it that way because he is the director. I don't know what his reasons were. Or maybe Jet Li and Lundgren had reasons why they did it that way.
Maybe I'm shortchanging a little bit, and it might be because of their ages. They needed to disguise the stuntmen. But like, why do that to the Steve Austin Randy Couture fight? Like, they're both physically.
I think it's just because it was a nighttime filming. But I hear you.
In defense of Sly, I also have to say that, Doug, it's probably because the trend in filmmaking at the time is that's what they thought audiences wanted to see, is that Jason Bourne style of filmmaking where it creates false excitement. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's bullshit. But it was a really, really popular technique. And I think it was one of those things where Sly was like, hey, I gotta look like the other movies that people are going to see today. Mm-hmm.
The thing about this movie that I wanted to get your opinions on, because I've always felt this as well. I mean, look, at its heart, at the core of this film is the gimmick. And the gimmick is, okay, we have a movie with all of these action stars together in one film. Can you believe it? Like that, that's it. I mean, I feel like that's the gimmick of the film. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I can't speak to Stallone's mindset, but I can't help but wonder if he crafted a story purely based around that gimmick, where he didn't even really have a story per se. He just said, hey, I want to make a kick-ass, balls to the wall, love letter action movie with all of these guys in there. Then when he got financing, when he got approval to do it, he was like, okay, well, let's come up with a story, because the story itself is really, really thin. It's really, really loose. There's really not a lot there. And I was watching it again. I thought this from the beginning, but my latest viewing, guys, it really drove in. This movie is basically meta. I mean, if Stallone wanted to, he didn't really need to do a whole mercenaries on a mission type movie. He could have made it just, a week in the life of Stallone meeting up with his action. Because, I mean, Stallone is basically playing Rambo, maybe a more level-headed version of Rambo. Dolph Lundgren is basically playing Andrew Scott from Universal Soldier. Statham is playing Jason Statham. I don't think Jason Statham.
No,
his range is limited.
Yeah, but they're all playing themselves. They're all playing essentially characters that they've played before. And so that's kind of what I wonder is if Stallone was like, we'll just men on a mission movie. There'll be mercenaries. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't know what you guys think.
One of the easiest stories to write from an action perspective is like the Magnificent Seven story, where a group of outsiders is there to liberate an oppressed village. So, I mean, I guess as thin as it might have been, it's an easy story to write.
Well, and I think it serves the movie because you don't have to figure out any intricacies in the plot. It's a real simple point A to point B. And I think for this movie, it worked. I kind of like Sean's concept, though. I would have liked to have seen a more like, meta take on it in terms of like, looking at the camera a little bit more and winking.
Well,
and
we get that
that's
part
what the
two.
Series became, actually.
Yeah,
that's what the series evolved into.
Well, yes, no, it did for part two. So I think, yes, for the meta part, we got that in spades in part two. We talked about that in our review of that film because we talked about the one-liners. I'll be back. You've been back enough, and that that kind of stuff happened. But I will give credit to Sly, even though there was a little bit of a wink at the camera. Yes, he's playing kind of a combination of Cobra Eddie mixed with Rambo. Then you've got you got all the character actors kind of playing the type. But to give credit to Sly and the tone of this film, it was still a dark film. It was still a gritty film, a guerrilla-style type film with some incredible action pieces. So even though it might have been a wink at the camera, Sly just said at the same time, or produced at the same time, we are going to do an action film. So it's not just enough to get these actors together. We're going to have a fun time. We're going to do some... Now that we're about 40 minutes into talking about this film, I want to talk about a scene that I have gone back to YouTube just on a whim. Throughout the years, this came out 11 years ago, if you can believe it already, guys, this film. On a whim, I have literally gone to YouTube. You say, I love that scene. I just want to watch that scene because I love the sound effects. I love the visual effects. And I say to myself, Sly filmed this. This is so cool. Like, he did this shot. When they did the, what was it called? Fly and Fry? Fry and Die. Fry and Die. Okay, that was the scene where they're in the airplane and Statham comes out in the front of the airplane. That was a legit stunt. That was no CGI. He's in the front of that aircraft, and they talked about this, that there was some sort of, I forget what was in the front, but that was a legit opening in the hole, and they actually talked about, can we do something with this hole in the front of the plane? And that's how they came up with the idea that, I'll just poke my head up, and it's such a wicked shot of Statham with the shirt rippling in with the air, and he's firing the weapon down that dock of the people, and that music cues up, and the revving of the engine that gets closer to and people are blowing up, and you're watching that for the first time. You're like, oh wow, that was a freaking amazing. That aerial shot, and then you're like, oh, then the gas, and then Statham turns around like, oh my goodness, it's just that's one of the greatest action sequences of all time. I put that right up there with the T-1000 rig chase with the metal guy, man. Like, I've watched that over and over again on YouTube. Your thoughts?
Ryan, you remind me of me and my little boy reenacting scenes from a movie. Like, dude, wasn't it so amazing when the one guy was like, "You'll never take me alive," and the other guy's like, "Blah blah."
I was thinking that same thing. You sound like a kid describing his favorite scene.
I'm a nerd at heart when it comes to Sly and the action films, and when they're good, But that sequence was that's an impressive action sequence of actual no CGI and a
real explosion,
real explosions. And I don't know, like, you can almost feel the heat from the screen. What do you guys think of the Fry and Die? Come on, don't leave me hanging.
I love it. I mean, I think, now that you are mentioning it and talking about it, Ryan, I think it's important to note because, I mean, if you look at a lot of the action movies that are made nowadays, they don't have the budgets that this film had. And you certainly don't get action sequences that look as polished and nice as this is. I hate to say it, but a lot of the films actually that Dolph Lundgren has done recently that have gone direct to video and whatnot, I mean, the genre to an extent is kind of dying in a lot of ways. And we don't see scenes like that anymore. So yeah, I agree with you. When you see something like that, it's kind of like, wow, like this is a movie. Like this is a real movie here. And a lot of the stuff that we see nowadays is, sorry about my dog in the background. But a lot of the stuff that you see filmed nowadays, they don't have the budgets, they don't have the shooting time to effectively and properly do it. And so what you get is a shell of what could have been, sadly. So yeah, I agree with you. It's a dope shot.
I also think it illustrates the cool sort of shorthand that the two characters have with each other, and it really shows that they've been working together because he's able to use that Fry and Die, so obviously it's something they've done before, instantly it's a shorthand. Statham knows what he's got to do, and I thought that was also a really quick way to sort of illustrate that these guys have worked together a lot, and they've got this shorthand developed, and they're really a team. I do feel bad for the guy that at immigration. Now, he does pull his gun, so obviously he was going to shoot Barney. But I feel like Barney takes way too much pleasure in killing that guy. Where he's like, "You look nervous." I'm like, "Come on, I know you're a mercenary and stuff, and this guy's probably questionable, but I don't think he was Army. I think that was like this dude's job before the Army took over.
No,
And
the
he's
government
like,
was corrupt. No, I will defend Barney's actions for killing. This guy has led in probably sex trafficking. He's probably done some pretty. You got the feeling this guy was not legit behind the counter who went in and out of the country with certain exports. So that's my reason behind that. This guy was a creep because he had a kind of a unsaid language with the other two Army guys there, like kind of messing with these American tourists. So this guy was a creep.
That actually reminds me. I love how they had the cover on that plane. They had like the conserve wildlife or whatever sticker that they had thrown on the side of it.
And speaking of the plane, again, because we watched parts 2 and then 3, and then we're going back to this one. Incredible footage of this plane. What a very impressive piece of aircraft, and the cinematography and the filming of the plane, the above the air shots, below the plane, the plane's going to the water when it lands. I don't know. They really showcased this plane in this I was going to say episode, but in this part 1, and I just thought again, Sly's directing and cinematography team really captured the aesthetics of this plane very well. That never got captured again.
It kind of bums you out because if this was made in the 80s, we would have gotten like the G.I. Joe size figures. The Dolph one would have been a little bit bigger than everyone else. But, and then you would have got the plane with all the accessories.
Oh, man.
Jason Statham would have had the knife accessory pack or whatever. I don't think Doug really got to talk about this scene, though.
I'm sorry. I was actually... I was watching the Mickey Rourke monologue again.
Well, yeah. No, let's talk. I'll insert the clip, and Doug, why don't you give your thoughts on that?
Going back to Mickey Rourke himself, they had him for like a day and a half because he was in between obligations himself.
Iron Man 2,
and he delivers this monologue about him and Barney being back in Bosnia, and he starts tearing up in the middle of it, and he's saying that we don't stand for shit, and oh my god, in a movie where it's wall-to-wall action and comedic moments that you want out of an action movie, you got this really kind of couple of minute part where it's just a straight heartfelt monologue that kind of comes out of nowhere. And it kind of, if you want a scene that gets inside you, it's this one. Like this is, you walk away. Yeah. You remember like the explosions and the fights and everything else, but this monologue it stuck with me.
It was like his shoe shine moment.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
And I think that, okay, there's a lot to talk about with that scene. So yes, that's an incredible scene by Mickey Rourke. It's both, it's one of those scenes where it's both frustrating to see Mickey perform this and to see him crap out his career before this too. It's unfortunate. You can see what he has in his tank still, and for whatever, and then again with the wrestler, I think it was around the same time. So you see that Mickey still has this in him, but kind of wasted years with botched plastic surgery and boxing and what have you. So it's unfortunate it's fortunate that we see this coming from Mickey, and it's also kind of frustrating to watch this coming from Mickey when you could have realized how much more he could have given us as moviegoers with other films. But that being said, it does serve a very important part of the film. So I know Sly wrote this film, and he directed it, of course. So he would have been directing Mickey. I don't know what their conversations were, but I wonder what their conversation was. Hey, okay, Mickey, this is your scene. You're going to give this speech that you're going to give this speech that I wrote. Craig jumped out of the meeting. He'll probably come back. Oh, there he is.
Sorry, I meant I was going to hit mute. And
no worries. So I was just saying that I wonder what the behind-the-scenes discussion was between Sly and Mickey. When Sly goes, "I wrote this piece of dialogue for you, Mickey. I want you to cry. I want you to choke up." I'm kind of curious what the direction was by Sly, or he probably just let Mickey do whatever he.
I think Mickey said, "I got this."
Yeah.
This is the end of peak Mickey Rourke in terms of his popularity, I think his acting ability, and his face. Because after this, he went down a road that I have no idea where he's gone, and I'm not going to
mental health
shame anybody.
It's probably mental health issues on top of everything else.
Yeah. But I mean, he was coming off The Wrestler, which he got nominated for the Oscar for.
Huge comeback piece for him.
Yeah.
And say what you want about Iron Man 2, it had its problems because it was made in the middle of or coming up against a writer's strike. And and it's, the Iron Man movies are sort of like the Expendables, where they decline in quality as you go along. But yeah, I think Sly knew just to get out of Mickey Rourke's way. They probably, I bet you they had a quick conversation maybe the night before. Like Sly was like, hey, these are the beats we need to hit. Mickey Rourke was like, okay, let's go to the bar, have some drinks. And then the next day, I think they just banged it out.
Well,
there aren't too many cuts in it, right? It's a
say it again.
I was saying there aren't too many cuts in it, right? It's
straight up
a one shot.
It's a one shot model. It's on his face the whole time and close in on his face the whole time. And he's tearing up. He's actually got some drool coming down his lip. He's like really like he's in a moment. I will say though, it's not that it's just out of the acting and the emotion is. I would say it feels out of place, but you're right. It's almost like an Oscar-worthy performance in an action film, which is very odd to see that type of. Again, we get that with First Blood, like Craig was saying at the end. So this is kind of like the shoe shine moment in Expendables. Exactly, a great metaphor. But it serves a point in the story, and I think I missed it at. I've seen this movie many times, but watching this movie in reverse order is kind of funny to watch it now. The Expendables at this time as a team, they had become a little bit blackened. They had become a little bit disingenuous with their motives to get money. They were mercs for hire. That they didn't really have a moral code. And Mickey Rourke's character Tool, he was reminding Barney like there was a time Tool saying, I'm lost. My demons have overtaken me. My life, like I've lost myself to the demons, but there's hope for you. Because he says that woman jumped off the bridge. Instead of me, a great line where he says, of all the people I've killed, I had a chance to save somebody. And I turned my back on that woman. I heard her jump into the river or the ocean or whatever, and she died, a suicide, whatever. And he goes, I could have saved her. I could have talked her down from the bridge. But I did. I turned my back on her because it's uncomfortable to meet somebody there. And he's telling Barney, look, you left a girl behind or somebody in distress on that island, and you're going to turn your back on her because the money's not there anymore. And so Barney had a kind of a come to Jesus moment where he's like, yeah, I don't want to lose my soul. I see my friend here who's lost himself, and I have a chance to turn my life around. It's not about the money. Now it's about the morally right thing to do. So the team went back without the money. I think we kind of forget that. So the team at this time is kind of again. There's a lot of great stories that we don't see that happened before this film, even of the Expendables, where I guess they had lost their own reasons of being good. They just started doing things for the money, and we don't. And so the team corrects that course. So that's why the future films are kind of, I would say they're more maybe jovial or maybe more because now that you could argue they kind of got their moral mojo back after this moment.
The sequels, that's and I said it when in my essay, if you will, in Expendables 3. But that's one of the huge problems with the series is, okay, these are tough guy mercenaries, okay, who take on nasty, dirty jobs for money. And at about Expendables 2 and then definitely in Expendables 3, it kind of became like this weird, like high school clique type social club kind of thing to where it's like, look, are you guys mercenaries or is this like a geriatric golf club kind of thing? You know what I mean? That's kind of, but okay. If there's one thing that I will, okay, with my podcast, obviously we look at all the films of Dolph Lundgren, and many have not seen all of the films that Dolph has done. But I will say, Ryan, that's one of the things that I wish this script had done that it didn't. Okay, Dolph did a movie back in '95. I would actually put it as one of his very best movies, and no one ever talks about it, called Men of War. Have you guys seen Men of War? Are you guys familiar with Men of War?
No, I gotta put that on my watch list. I would love to see. I know I've heard of it. I've heard of it. Yes.
So Men of War is amazing. It was actually written by John Sayles.
Oh, wow.
Amazing. Yeah,
okay.
It's amazing. But what Men of War does is what I feel Expendables should have done. And what it is, okay, it's basically in that one, Dolph is a leader of a band of mercenaries, okay? They go to this island to do some immoral deeds, and then Dolph's moral compass gets righted, and he realizes, look, I don't want to do this. And so what happens is his team of mercenaries gets fractured, okay, to where he leads the good guys in becoming the island's saviors, if you will. And then the other guys are in it for the money. And the other guys come back to the island and a big war erupts. And as I was watching this, I've thought this since the very beginning. I feel like this movie has so many characters that I almost kind of wonder if it might have been more effective if Sly did something like that. To where, okay, Sly basically says, all right, I'm going to go back and I'm going to save this island. And then you have members of his team who are saying, hey, wait a minute, we need the money. And don't you think that, I think that would have been kind of compelling, is if you had team Stallone, Statham, and Jet Li, okay, they're on the good guys. And then suddenly Dolph, Terry Crews, and Randy Couture, they're the bad guys suddenly working for Eric Roberts, and you have a full-on assault. Because if we want to go to the third act, that's the other issue, is that there are really no stakes. All of these good guys live at the end of the movie. None of them are even injured. If you think about it, none of these guys even take a bullet. And so that's one thing that I kind of wonder. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Well, okay, well, slow down about that. They were injured. I will be. I'll push back
the series, though.
But you're right. It's an action film where the good guys. It seems like they're unscathed. But if you actually go back and look at the fights, those bumps and stuff. Sly was injured in real life taking that fight with Austin.
Right.
But
and I know I kind of went on different points, but I'll go to my first point though. Yeah. Don't you think that would have been kind of cool if that would have made things a little tighter if they had this core team who gets split, and that could have led to some really cool marketing, like which team are you on? Team Lundgren or Team Stallone? You know what I mean?
Well, that's what Avengers Civil War did. That's what Avengers Civil War did. So I agree with you.
It was Captain America, actually.
What did I say? Oh, sorry, my bad. Yeah,
which is basically Avengers.
It was an Avengers film.
We just lost. How many people just stopped the podcast because you don't know your Marvel?
Oh, well, excuse me. Anyway.
No, you can't make Terry Crews the bad guy, though. Terry Crews is just too...
Okay.
But I do want to talk about the mercenary aspect real quick. And I think that Terry Crews has his best scene in the entire series when he's talking about the psychological aspect of weapons.
Oh,
the loudness of the weapons he chooses and why he uses that shotgun. And I think it's really cool that he sort of illustrates that, like, the noise is as impactful as the damage the bullet will do psychologically. Like, when they hear this gun, they're going to shit themselves. And that gives you a psychological edge. And I think that's a really sort of underappreciated scene in this whole series and I think it's the best acting moment that Terry Crews gets in the entire series.
Interesting. And it was a great payoff too when the gun was used, and the moment when the Expendables were pinned down, they were overwhelmed, and that was during the fight with Austin and Sly. They and there's that great sequence where Sly and Austin are on the ground mid-fight. They both kind of look over. They just see this big menacing black guy with a huge automatic shotgun walking down the hallway about 30 feet away. It was a great shot, like almost like a monster from a creature movie.
Yeah, and then he gets that great line where he says, "Remember this shit at Christmas."
Yeah.
Like
that's another one. It's complete action movie to a T, complete with the witty quips in between action set pieces.
Well,
in the middle of the action.
Speaking of witty clips, hold your thought there, Sean. Don't lose your thought. But I wanted to bring this up before I forgot about it. Is for some reason all three Expendable films suffer from this a little bit. The dialogue is it's often disjointed. I don't know how to describe it, but it seems like their quips and the way they speak to each other. I know it's supposed to be playful banter, but it seems scripted, which I know it sounds ironic because it's a scripted movie, but it just sometimes it doesn't seem natural, which is important when you're doing a film. No matter, like, look at First Blood. There was never a time during First Blood where I thought, well, that's kind of a scripted response by the sheriff to Sly's character, Rambo. Like, I never once thought that, because that's natural dialogue, well written dialogue. So for whatever reason, Sly's a great, at least a great writer in the Rocky films, but for some reason, I don't know what it is with the Expendable films, but the dialogue is disjointed. It doesn't quite flow, and the jokes don't land. It's hard to explain. That's my biggest complaint, even with this film, was like, some of the awkward humor, it just wasn't funny, and I don't know why they would think it's funny.
I think a lot of that, in my opinion, Ryan, is because Sly did not write this movie with the intent for it to be taken seriously like First Blood. Again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, but the film is a gimmick, and the entire movie was built on the idea of a gimmick of getting all these guys together. And then what they did, he kind of went about it backwards. If you think about a story to serve. I mean, I know this is the Expendables 1 episode, but I mean, there's a scene in Expendables 2 where they ask Stallone for a pen, and he pulls out his pen and it has skulls on it, and they're like, "Is there anything you have that doesn't have skulls on it?" Like, how's that funny? Like, what?
Well, that's
what
not. Yeah, I admit that's not necessarily funny. But here's the thing: the bad guys, so to speak, their script, their dialogue flowed. So I will say their conversations had more of a flow. Like Eric Roberts, that scene where he talks about when he's talking to the captured general's daughter, he's like, "I don't hit people, but my goon will hit. My goon will hit a woman." There's scenes with the quote unquote bad guys and their conversations and their dialogue did flow, but for some reason the Expendables dialogue, their interaction, not all the time, but especially when it comes to the quips, they just didn't land. But I don't know why the quips were maybe. Sly's not a great humorist when it comes to actually writing that, other than his. I think that's what it might be. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
But, I mean, also to back up Sean's point, you could tell this was written completely tongue in cheek, but maybe they don't punch up the villain's dialogue because you don't want to like them. You don't want to find anything endearing about them, even if it is like a beat of comedy. You don't want to. So I mean, maybe it's to draw the line between good and evil in this one.
And I think, Doug, sorry, Craig, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sure your thought is more in line with what Doug's talking about.
Well, to go along with your point, Doug, I think if Stallone had intended this to be taken seriously, then he would have given the team of the Expendables more stakes, and we would have seen more of a threat, because you mentioned it earlier, Doug. I mean, this is Stallone's version of Magnificent Seven. And if you look at a film like Magnificent Seven, or even a film like The Dirty Dozen, for example, you have a group of men on a mission movie, but there are casualties in the end. Okay. Not all of the seven survive. Not all of the Dirty Dozen survive. And in this film, for it being such a difficult mission, they all survive at the end, and they're all hanging out at that bar at the end. So, I mean, I go back and forth on it. On one hand, okay, if he meant it to be tongue in cheek and silly, then of course he's going to have all the characters live at the end. But then there are some other scenes that are just so violent that it's like, well, how hard was this mission? Or maybe these guys are just so amazingly good at what they do that they all survive the mission in the end.
You know what I think it was at the end of the day? It was Sly knew that if this movie did well, there would be sequels. And he's like, how can I take food off Terry Crews's table? Even with Dolph, Dolph was supposed to die in this movie.
Yeah.
And at some point they're like, well, if there's a sequel, we're going to need Gunner. So I think that was what it was. I mean, you understand it from a business perspective that imagine like Sly being like, oh, sorry, you're not going to be around for the sequel because you die in this movie.
Well, we know one thing about Stallone is he's loyal to his guys,
right?
For sure. So yeah, that's a good point, also, Craig.
Well, look,
I do want to go back to what you were saying about the villain and the dialogue, and I might have missed it because I stepped out for a minute. But I think Eric Roberts has a really good sort of, he's got like the whiny villain line at the end where he completely misses the point of why the team came back. Where you get Barney saying, "I came back for her, dipshit." But he's got this frustration where he's like, hey, I was part of this, and then the government took it away from me, and it was kind of really, I think Eric Roberts played it really well, where it's like the whiny villain, like he's like, hey, what about me? I got screwed here too, and I think that's a really well written scene. I mean, I think it's a little heavy handed. Again, when Barney says I came back for her, but I think it's kind of really on the nose. But I think that's a good scene, and that's a scene I don't think you'd get in a lot of your sort of by the book action movies, and I think that's kind of what Sly brings to the genre.
Are we to believe that Yin Yang, Jet Li's character, he's
Sean, you're on mute. Sorry.
Oh. Sorry about that.
You had to say something. You were on mute.
Oh, I wasn't looking at the screen. I just started talking. Well, it worked out perfect. It worked out perfectly. Though Doug interrupted my talk to let me know that I didn't actually step on Sean. That he was muted naturally. Now I've got to edit that disaster. Okay, all right. Sean,
leave it in.
All right, I'm just joking. I'll just finish this and Sean, jump in. Was Yin Yang number 3? Because it seems like he was in on these decision making stuff. I didn't notice that until watching this again after the other two. was like, oh, he was in it like, yeah, let's make this happen. It was kind of like him, Statham, and Stallone's character. They seemed to be the top three guys. Like they were looking for Yin Yang's input, which I thought was a nice little touch. And then Yin Yang came in the truck to talk to Barney, which led to what we've talked about already. But that whole so Yin Yang was at least shown in the first film to be kind of like one of the top leaders of the group. Maybe that was some of the jealousy that Gunnar had with Ying. Maybe he felt he should have been up there. It was never really explored, but you could insinuate it.
Well, when this film was marketed, when it was being shopped around at the AFM, I believe it was back in 2008, that is how it was shopped around. It was I remember the poster actually when this hit message boards and internet. It was big, but it was Stallone, Statham, Lee, the Expendables, and those were the top three. And then it waited. It was about a month or so of gaining interest with those top three leads. Then suddenly, you got Lundgren, and then that's when suddenly it seemed like not even a week went by where someone new wasn't added to the cast. But yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. I think that was the initial intent, was before all these other guys came on board, Stallone intended this movie to be pretty much him and those other two guys, Statham and Lee. Because if you think about it, around 2007, 2008, Statham and Jet Li had done that movie War together for
right.
Lionsgate. So they were pretty big at the time. So
yeah, I mean, if you look at internationally what the three of those guys could do, Jet Li, huge in the Asian market, Stallone, huge overseas still, and Statham, a viable star in the U.S. So from a business standpoint, it makes sense as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, Doug, you're going to say something there, and I think
I was going to say Stallone is, if nothing, he's a smart businessman.
Sure.
He is.
No,
except when it comes to water. I don't think Sly Water really took off.
Did he have Sly Water?
Yeah, you know what? Before I moved cross country, I had a bottle of Sly Water that I think they gave out when they showed Rocky at the steps when they rededicated the statue at the art museum.
2006.
I've told this story before, and Mike Kunda was there before we even knew each other.
Wow.
But they gave out bottles of Sly Water, and I drank it that day, and then I refilled it and sealed it back up. And unfortunately, it didn't make the cross country move with me. Those are the hard decisions you have to make when you're loading up the truck.
He had a magazine too.
Water,
Slime Moves.
Slime Moves.
And actually, he shared really early on. He shared script pages from what became Rocky Balboa in that magazine.
That's
I think
right.
that's.
Yeah, it only lasted, if I remember right, like 4 issues. It lasted about as long as Gene Simmons' magazine.
Publishing's really hard.
Publishing's the magazine.
Yeah, publishing's really, really hard.
Especially now.
Yeah.
When you were carrying the water, Sly's water, did somebody bump into you and you go, oops, and they turned around and said, is that all you can say? The toughest he can say is oops. I don't know why I thought it was Sly carrying water.
You're awful.
What wasn't awful? I don't know. All right. You guys saw the theatrical cut recently, or
I don't know if you can see it. Is that it? Sly Water?
The water.
You probably can't see my phone. But
Oh,
no.
Is it blue and yellow?
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. Oh, great. I'll Google that. That's funny. Sorry. Did you guys see the theatrical cut? Because I'm just curious. Okay. The scene where the female, the general's daughter, played by the very attractive, I forget her name, Iselle or something like that.
Something.
Yeah. She was 27 in the film, by the way. I just wanted to see what her age difference was between her and Sly's love interest. It was about 40 years, or 30 years, 35 years. But
well, real quick before you get on that thought, I think, Sean, that's why they did what they did with Statham. They're like, hey, we're going to need a relationship angle in this movie because for some reason they feel they need him. And Sly was like, I'm not going to be the old creeper that he became in other movies, But I think that was probably the thing. They're like, hey, we've got Statham. He's young enough where we can have this sort of legitimate romance and not have it get creepy.
yeah, that's
That makes sense.
Giselle,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Giselle Itilla. So she's a South American. I'm not sure maybe Mexican. I'm not sure which country she's from, but she's She was she was absolutely gorgeous to look at, but I don't even like the idea that they try to insinuate there was some sort of attraction between. Look, hey, love has no age boundaries. I understand. She's 27. Sly was probably about 57 at the time. No, he would have been older. 11 years ago, he would have been 63. So it would have been his 63 to her 27. That's a pretty.
Yeah. No, but again, and we've talked about this on the show before, is how old is Barney Ross supposed to be?
I don't care. I don't care. To me, I don't know. It's
because I got to say that Barney Ross and Stallone in this movie, this might be the last time Stallone looked really, really good on screen. I mean, Barney Ross looks great in this movie. I think whatever weight Stallone came into this movie at was perfect. His face looked good.
Well, that's what Trench mentioned that in their little meeting in the church. He goes, "Oh, you lost weight," and then Barney Ross goes, "You've gained weight," which is, of course, that's the meta. That's the meta. Yeah. That whole scene is all meta between him and Bruce Willis, with the idea that Arnold is, because he's a congressman at the governor. So, of course, he's put on a little bit of weight because he's not doing action films. Yeah. Sly did lose weight. And
and you see Sly without his shirt, which, again, is it the last time we saw it?
Sorry. Thank you for bringing it up. When I saw this in the theaters in 2010, and I'm a huge Sly fan, of course, I thought, even after leaving the film, I thought those, minus the Expendables one, I thought those tattoos were for the film. I had no idea. I had no idea. It was well after. I don't even know when I discovered it. It's like, what? Those were real? Those were his tattoos? That was Sly. Because he doesn't do... Well, how many films does he take off his shirt exposing his tattoo? He did it for Bolt to the Head. He did it. Which we have yet to review. But this was the first film where he exposed his shirtless body with the tattoos. And so look, I'm a fan, but I'm not like a creepy fan. I didn't know that he had tattooed himself. But were you guys, when you saw this for the first time, did you know those were real tattoos?
Well, yeah, Doug, that's why you got your tattoos, right?
That's why I started getting tattoos.
Because you were inspired by Barney Ross. And maybe that's your nickname. Is that your nickname, Barney?
I guess I was just naive to it. So I think that was Sly's way of showing the world, because they were pretty recent, because he didn't have them for Rocky Balboa. And that was 2006.
No, I remember seeing him on TV in I don't know if it was on TV or on the internet, probably on the internet, in a tattoo chair, getting tattooed.
Yeah, it was just completely.
I can't. My timeline is.
He got them because one of his tattoos is a picture of his wife, Jennifer Flavin, and I don't know exactly when they got married, but he got it kind of
mid-90s.
Yeah, so I mean, I think he got it. Had to be early 2000s or so. But Grudge Match, he had them all painted over. When he did Grudge Match, they were all okay. I don't know what they used to paint over it.
But he didn't have them. He didn't have them for Rocky Balboa, and that was 2006. So in a 4-year span, he covered his body, which is fine. It was just weird that age and stage. Good for him. That age and stage in his life. He's like, I'm gonna tap myself up. Anyway, sorry, Craig, when you mentioned the tattoo scene.
Yeah, no, Ryan, do you want to sort of dovetail into the big scene with Schwarzenegger, Willis, and Sly, since you sort of referenced it?
Well, we've talked about it a couple of times. Of course, when this happened on the big screen, I mean, it was amazing for us nerds to see. It's like the first time you see Batman and Superman on screen together. Let's be honest. It's like you dreamed of it your whole life. Finally, we're seeing the shared screen of Sly and Arnold. What are your guys' thoughts on that? As quick as it was, what are your thoughts?
The only thing missing was, instead of meeting at a church, they should have just been meeting at a Planet Hollywood. Let's be honest.
That's too meta. Can you imagine?
Planet Hollywood. But that's what it was.
No, it's not that bad. It wasn't that bad.
No, I mean, come on. When Schwarzenegger looks at Stallone and says, "Give this job to my friend. He loves playing in the jungle." Wink, wink. Rambo. They should have just been meeting at a Planet Hollywood.
Well, if we're going to go that far, they should have just met at a Taco Bell with Trench being the president of the United States.
I will say this. Sly was extremely generous here, because we've all talked about sort of the rivalry those two had in the 80s, and how Schwarzenegger talked about how he tricked Stallone into taking certain roles that were bad for his career. But I think Sly was really generous here, because he basically lets Schwarzenegger or Trench get the upper hand here, where Trench says, "I don't need the money. so he can have this job. But he also shows that Trench is more aware of what's going on globally because he knows of the island, he knows of Elena. So he really like it's a great scene for Schwarzenegger because it completely exposes Barney as like being unprepared and also needing the money. So I thought that was really generous as Sly.
Yeah, you could argue that this just shows that Sly's team, or sorry, Barney Ross's team, has been doing things for the money as of late, that they're not involved with the world affairs, they're just involved who's the highest bidder. Whereas Trench's character might already kind of be on the moral high ground. I hate to say it. And and what I also love is when this happened, I remember thinking, oh man, that was, it was fun, but boy, that's too quick, because I knew he was still governor at the time. Was he not still governor at the time?
He was. Yeah. It had to be right around that.
Yeah,
and he had to do it for free because as governor, I don't think he can act in a film, so he had to do that for free. But then we get Expendables 2 and 3, and we got a lot of Arnold, and I don't tire of it. I love Arnold. He's got great charisma on screen, and who does? I love Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's a great action star. Sly's a better actor, let's be honest, a better creator. But boy, Arnold's great on screen. He just fills it up literally, and he's just got that voice and that persona on screen. It seems like a great guy, and so when we got Expendables 2 and 3, I admit I loved the trench scenes. There's never a trench moment where I don't enjoy it.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that in Expendables 1, Willis, Stallone, and Schwarzenegger were not all together. I think it was Sly and Willis, and then Sly and Schwarzenegger, and then through creative editing, they put the scene together.
I'm confused who wasn't there because there was times where I think Sly and Arnold weren't there.
I think it was Sly and Willis were together for a shot for a filming day, and then Schwarzenegger and Sly.
Watch it again.
You see Sly and Schwarzenegger in a 2-shot.
I think you're right, Craig. Yeah, because I remember hearing that too. And if you really look at it and really want to break it down, there's some tricky editing there, but looks cool.
I was hoping for a Robert De Niro, Al Pacino first time on screen meeting. That in that style, and I don't know, man.
It was a little bit too silly, maybe.
They're two biggest action stars of all time coming together on screen for the first time. I don't know. I was hoping for something more than what we got.
Then we get that in part 2,
and you get it in Escape Plan. You got it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. Escape Plan.
That's
the
true.
Escape Plan is more of what I was hoping for.
So I guess we do get it, but in that moment we didn't know what the future held. So it's a fair to feel that way in the moment, but we get it in spades for part 2, Escape Plan part 1. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but in a vacuum, I didn't like that scene as much.
No, you're right. It's actually not a very strong scene.
Well, and the other problem is we all knew it was coming. Can you imagine if they had somehow kept that under wraps?
And they should have. That was another thing that I was a little disappointed in. They spoiled that in the trailer. They should have kept that a secret because let's be honest, I think this film would have done just fine without them spoiling that in the trailer.
Yeah, you don't need that. Yeah,
this would have been, if anything, that would have been like an extra little surprise, if you will.
Well, and it would have given probably good word of mouth, Sean, for
surprise for the opening weekend, anyways, because people would have.
And and I remember seeing the trailer when they spoiled that scene. It was like, why? And I get it. Look, I get it, but on the other hand, it was like, why would you spoil that?
They probably had that very same discussion. Like, do we spoil it? Telling people that Arnold is in the film to get a couple Arnold butts in the seat. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Can you imagine putting out 850 as an Arnold fan and being like, okay, I got my 35 seconds, and then leaving?
Well, I can't imagine there's too many Arnold fans that can't stand Statham and Sly films. Like, you gotta.
That diagram is pretty deep on that one.
Yeah. Oh boy, Sven diagram coming up again. It was almost like mentioning that Doug's a cop in every episode.
Yeah. So is the only major
check that box?
Is the only major sequence that we haven't talked about the big car chase scene?
Well, before you do, I want to go back. Yeah, we'll mention that truck scene. That's a great scene. Going back to Sean's early comments regarding Randy, what did you think of his ear talk monologue? That was like the most we've ever heard him speak as an actor or in these films. I was like, I forgot. Holy, he's talking a lot here. He's going on about this ear in this scene. But if you watch it again, you could tell he's reading a cue card. Whatever angle he's looking at, he's talking to the group. But whatever he's looking at, it's a cute. There's no way this guy memorized that dialogue. I'm telling you right now.
It was like a weird character trait they wanted to give him, that like he was insecure about his ear, and there's really no payoff for it. It's
weird.
Yeah,
it seems shoehorned in just to explain that a guy who doesn't know what cauliflower ears are.
Well, you'll be surprised, but that was probably it was a bit of art and life and art saying, hey, we should let the audience know this guy's deformed.
It was shoehorned in because I think it was their way of saying Randy Couture is a mixed martial artist fighter with experience in wrestling. You know, in case you guys didn't know, again, going along with what I said earlier about this being meta, I feel like that was like the most meta thing they could have done. I think like they could have. I mean, they could have said, hey, remember. Before we picked you up for the Expendables, you were fighting in the octagon. They could have said that, well, you know, but that was their attempt at humor.
Truck scene there, Craig. What do you the truck chase scene?
Yeah, I mean it's just another great sequence in this film. You know, it kind of hits all the boxes of terms of action sequences. You know, you've got hand-to-hand stuff that goes on. You've got the big explosions that go on. You've got all the gunfighting that goes on. And then you've got a pretty decent chase as well through the streets of New Orleans.
I was cringing every time the truck took damage. Like, oh, it's a nice-looking truck.
Sly still they make 3 for the film?
Oh,
yeah. I know that those were all replicas of. I think it was based on a Ford from the 1950s, I believe.
You know what it was a nod to? It must have been was the
1955 Ford F-100. So.
There you go. I think it was a nod to the Cobra car chase.
I was thinking that during the chase.
But yeah, I love that sequence. For the sound editing in that sequence is amazing. The way that truck sounds and the whole like I don't know what it is, but the sound edit. I know I'm full of it today, Doug. Jeez.
Right.
No, but
Ryan describing his favorite action scenes.
But again,
I don't know how. Well, I'm trying to describe action scenes in auditory podcasts. I don't know. I'm sorry.
But it also it felt real again. It doesn't look like there's too much CGI trickery going on. And you know, if you compare it to like the Fast and the Furious movies, where you watch those movies and they're great escapists, they're great popcorn films, but you watch those movies and you can see when there's like digital cars doing stuff,
right?
Whereas here you're like, there's a truck being driven by a really, really good driver, and Jet Li's in the back.
I want to talk about that. Again, the action star, they're called that for a reason, because even the way Jet Li handles the weapon, the way he shoots it, it's just cool. I don't know how to describe it, Doug, for this podcast. he was like, and he's like, but you know what I'm talking about? Those who've seen the film, the way it was filmed, Sly's direction, again, kudos to him. But the way Jet Li did that spring with the weapon and stuff, it's like, that's an action star being able to make it look cool. So great.
That's experience.
Yeah.
That's experience coming through. I mean, because you can boot camp any actor. We've seen that. You know, look at what they did with Keanu Reeves in the first Matrix, where I think if you go back and watch that now, you sort of see them just handling it like a dance, if you will. And you counterpoint that with every action in this movie. These guys have been doing this for years. They've got the experience under their belt, and they know how to handle weapons, and they know how to use their bodies. And
good point.
That's the one thing that I think, you know, kind of gets lost on, or is sad about sort of losing, you know, action stars, if you will, is, you know, you can train anybody to do anything and get around it with bullshit quick cutting and stuff. But like here, you've got guys that can all execute. And, you know, Sean alluded to it, you know, it's something that we're losing. And this movie's a great showcase for it.
Now, before we kind of wrap things up, Sean, because you are here as our guest host from your Dolphin Lundgren podcast, I Must Break This Podcast. Every time I talk about your podcast, I always call it I Must Break This Podcast, because the title of the podcast is I Must Break This Podcast, but it's a podcast, so you have to say I Must Break This Podcast. Anyways,
it took me forever to come up with a title. Too,
I love
by
it.
The way,
I love it.
I thought about, but it seems like, and that was like my last resort because I just couldn't come up with it. And
it's the hardest thing.
And it seems like everybody digs it, to be honest. So, and I'm 60 6 episodes in or whatever. So
That's awesome.
got to keep going.
Now, before we close up this, I want to get your final thoughts on Dolph's overall performance in this film. And I'm actually, before you do, I want to give my 2 bits. My 2 bits is this isn't taking it away from Dolph. It's not his fault, but his character development in this film is really kind of frustrating. It's a weird.
It is.
Okay.
It is.
Like the other 2 films, it's fine because we just know that he's part of the team. But I'm actually legit confused when he attacked Jet Li's character, Sly's character in that truck scene that we just talked about. Was his intention to actually kill them? I'm actually confused. Did he actually want them dead? And what was the redemption? How did he get redeemed to get let back in the team? Can you explain to me his arc in this film?
He gave Sly the layout of the villain's lair at the end of the movie.
So
Right.
who sent Gunner?
Well, Gunner was working with them at that point because isn't there?
Oh
that
yeah,
scene
yeah.
where-
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was hired by Eric Roberts because he used to be one of them,
Oh.
and he wanted $100,000.
Okay, so that sequence happened. Then so Gunner legitimately left the team, and his intention was, I'm going to kill Barney and okay, but Barney's very forgiving, I guess. That's
Yeah. What this was, from what I can gather, was Dolph he was going to be killed in the film, and he signed on for it. He was totally fine with it. I mean, Dolph has been killed in a ton of movies, so he was totally fine with it. And the reaction to his casting was so huge on the internet. I mean, if you if you go back this far, it's really kind of fascinating to think about it. But back in 2008, 2009, movie journalism. I mean, this film was at the forefront of movie journalism, and I mean, there was a ton of set reports and everything like that. And so, from what I can gather, is the buzz regarding his casting was so huge and so big, kind of like what you said earlier, Doug. I think Stallone was kind of like, hey, wait a minute, there is a potential franchise here. And if everyone likes Dolph's inclusion in this, I'm going to keep him on board. But like you said, Ryan, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, call me crazy, okay? But, okay, if one of you guys went out to kill me, you know what? I don't think I'd want to be friends with you again. Call me crazy. So,
or let alone entrust my life in your hands in these very dangerous missions. Like that's a whole other bottle of wax too.
Well, I think ultimately they didn't really. I mean, it's referenced that he's got some kind of drug problem, but they didn't really showcase it anywhere near enough. And I think Barney's able to realize that it wasn't Gunner doing it; it was the drugs. Or whatever substance abuse problem that Gunner had. And I guess he knew the Gunner before addiction. And I think he was able to forgive that.
Yeah,
you
you could argue that
because
because even he seemed pained. Like even when he shot Gunner, it was pretty. I know it's an action movie, but it was actually good acting on Sly's part there, where he seemed pained by having to shoot him. It was like
he throws his hand to the ground. And he's like, shit.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
So it was like, man, this guy is a troubled guy, but so he's obviously got a soft spot for the Gunner character, and there's history there that we don't see in the film, obviously. So yeah, that's fair. Okay,
but
well,
I think it would have been serviced better as a series, kind of like what I said earlier.
Right,
I mean, kind of like what you were saying, Craig. The fact that they had a history, I think this whole concept probably would have been serviced better instead of doing 3 films. If it would have been a television series, you know what I mean? Then they could have really gone back and fleshed out those relationships and everything.
Well, and look at what's going on with, like, I'd say mainly Amazon. If you look at the programming that Amazon's been doing, they've got The Boys, which is ultra violent, really great storytelling. They've got Bosch. If Sly was developing Expendables in 2018 instead of 2008 or whatever, who knows? He might have gone to Amazon and gone to series.
Definitely.
And that actually is something that probably would have been really, really cool.
Well, that was a question brought up by Drew in our chat. He's like, whatever happened to that television series? I think it was talked about.
That's classic Sly. He loves talking about shit he's never going to do. What? Yeah, where's the Zombie Squad Netflix show that nobody wants?
Oh, I love it.
One person I could think of.
I picked up a paperback copy of that book that he's been talking about for years called Hunter.
I've read it.
Yeah,
I've read it.
Yeah.
And I thought about reading it, but then I was like, who knows when it's going to get made? It'll continue sitting in my garage. But you've read it. Is it good?
I read it back in the 90s when it was talked about.
Well, that was supposed to be Rambo 5.
Yeah. Well, no, even no, it might have been no. When he first bought the book, I swore I read it in the 90s, if not early 2000s, but it was a long time ago. And when he first bought the rights to this is like pre-internet, because I think I read about this in an entertainment magazine.
Yeah.
That Stallone was going to star in this Hunter. But when I read the book, I envisioned the movie in my mind when I was reading the book those many years ago, and it was not a Rambo film. It was he had purchased the book to be this hunter dude. And I remember thinking then, he's kind of getting a little bit long in the tooth to be this character in the book. But anyways, there you go. But yeah,
after it's kind of like Predator, right? Yeah, but no, after Rambo 4, he did I think one of those Q&As he did for Ain't It Cool News. And I remember an audio clip that they put on the website where Sly was talking about Rambo 5, and he said it's going to go in a different direction than people that are fans of the series are used to. And he sort of described Hunter, where, it's Rambo versus, this genetically engineered beast. And I was like, Sly, don't do this to Rambo. You might as well take him to fucking space next. And we got Last Blood, which isn't much better. One of those things that he's held on to for years, and I doubt it'll ever get developed as anything.
Yeah. All right, Doug, any closing thoughts on the film overall?
Overall, I like it. I think it shows up the most out of the three that we've watched. And not that they shouldn't have done sequels, but I really wish the sequels would have lived up more to the original, because it could go down as one of the greatest action franchises of all time.
It's still fun. All three have something to offer.
Still fun.
Even the third one with Mel Gibson, we talked about that. And there's something to be said for you. I don't think you'd watch any of the Expendables films and go on board. This is like, you're gonna have fun watching any of them. But I think the first one does showcase a little bit of that grittiness, combined with the humor, combined with the great aesthetic look. It has a great aesthetic look the other two just didn't have. So I think we can credit Sly for that.
Definitely love it though. Good action film.
Craig, final thoughts?
Sly is at his best when he's got something to prove. And, we've seen it when he did Rocky Balboa. We saw it when he did, the fourth Rambo film. And The Expendables is another sort of, I would put that on the same level in terms of Sly being focused and saying, okay, I've promised that I'm going to sort of do this return to action that Rambo sort of really set up. I mean, I remember seeing Rambo in theaters and being like, I can't remember the last time I sat in a movie theater and saw this level of filmmaking from an action standpoint. So I think Sly rose to the occasion. This movie has its problems that we kind of pointed out, but at the end of the day, it delivers exactly what it was supposed to deliver. And again, when I was watching it yesterday, I was like, man, I can't wait to sit down and talk about this, because after watching 2 and 3, I kind of forgot how solid of an action movie this one was.
No, it was an interesting way of doing it. I think I like that we did it in that order, 2, 3, then 1. All right, Sean, closing thoughts on the film, and please plug your show. But before you plug your show, I just want to say, great job on your podcast, great episodes, great discussion about Dolph's filmography, and you've had some great guests who've worked on Dolph's films on your podcast, and that should be acknowledged. I don't think you would acknowledge that yourself, so let me do that for you. That you've had some incredible guests on your podcast in the Dolph world. So if anyone listening to this podcast, this is the one right now that we're listening to, it does not follow Sean on his podcast and likes Dolph Lundgren at the very least, my goodness, Sean, you are the torch-carrying king of the Dolph Lundgren podcast world. So go ahead and plug yourself.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, no. With regard to this film, I mean, look, this is quintessential Dolph viewing. I mean, this, I think, in addition to this being just a fun throwback love letter to action films of the 80s and the 90s, this one really, I mean, this was Dolph's comeback. I mean, he's had multiple comebacks over the years. I mean, but this was the film that brought him back on the big screen, which, I mean, if you had been following his career and seen him, premiering his movies on the shelves of Blockbuster, to see him back on the big screen was, for me at least, was really cool to see. Was really pretty special. So I think for that reason alone, minor quibbles aside, this film definitely gets a recommend. Yeah, thank you for the shout out. The podcast is I Must Break This Podcast. Yeah, we go in chronological order, reviewing all of Dolph's films, and in between the movie review episodes, I'm fortunate to have an interview episode, and I've really been blessed because I've gotten to speak with directors and writers and actors. I even got to speak with Dolph's stunt double. In fact, the Expendables, Tony Messenger, who did a lot of the stunts for Dolph Lundgren, I got to speak with him in a previous episode. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So thank you for the plug. It's I Must Break This Podcast, and we're on iTunes, Stitcher, and all the podcasting apps.
All right, that's awesome. Thank you, everyone that's joined us live and are listening to this right now on your earbuds. Check out, again, our individual shows on this feed. Slycast, Going the Distance, and Rocky Minute can be enjoyed on this same feed. And check out Sean's podcast. All right, guys, don't hang up. I'm going to stop recording. We'll talk to everyone later.